After the Sixth Coalition defeated Napoleon once and for all, Louis XVIII was installed on the French throne, to the chagrin of the common people of France. Louis XVIII tried to take a moderate stance on many issues in order to keep both the aristocracy and the common people satisfied. However, after Louis XVIII died, his brother, Charles X, took the throne. Charles X was a die-hard advocate for the Ancien regime, trying to restore France to its earlier glory. Professor One is a world-renowned scholar of the French Revolution who currently heads the history department at Duke University.
The key qualities of the 1830 revolution were that they granted more rights to the citizens, but most importantly, it was led by the bourgeoisie, who wanted greater economic freedom.
After 6 grueling years, the French people rose up in anger against their tyrant king. After usurping the throne, Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans, championed liberal reforms by helping create a liberal constitution and decrease voting restrictions so that more people could vote. The 1830 French Revolution sparked others in Poland, Italy, and Belgium, with only the Belgian Revolution achieving any success. Alas, this newfound stability would not endure. Louis Philippe became the bane of the Republicans, liberals, and the working class. Republicans disliked the monarchical government. Liberals opposed governmental corruption and conservative policies. The working class did not concern themselves with lofty political ambitions. Rather, their malcontent was based on impossible living conditions. The major crises that affected the people and spurred on the revolution were mainly economic. Famines in Ireland sent shockwaves throughout Europe and created continental economic recession. These economic hardships were the first sparks of discontent that would start the inferno of revolution across the European continent. Compounded by economic difficulties, the lower classes felt as though the bourgeois were dominating France under Louis Philippe's reign, since only the wealthy voted and the government failed to address many of the growing problems of the lower classes. After becoming fed up with injustice, the common people of Paris erected barricades and made Louis Philippe renounce his throne. They then replaced the monarchy with an executive committee. Immediately, the goals of the 1848 French Revolution were seen, with universal suffrage being granted to all males, abolition of the death penalty for capital crimes, and all slaves being freed in the colonies. But the quick changes almost all stopped there. The new government was plagued by disparities in ideology. On one side stood the moderate Republicans, who thought that universal male suffrage was the final straw, and that reforms should go no further. On the other was a new breed of Republican, the Socialists. Socialism had become a prominent ideology in France by this point because of the economic hardships that were prevalent among the urban poor. The artisans too believed in the power of socialism because they had seen how the competition inspired by capitalism cost them their jobs. Eventually, the socialists won out in this new government, with national workshops quickly being set up to alleviate unemployment for workers in Paris. However, people from all over streamed in on the hopes that they too could gain employment. Many had to be turned away. In fact, as many as 120,000 were employed, while 80,000 had to be left. According to Alex de Tocqueville, a famous author and delegate to the 1848 Constituent Assembly, socialism was the main aspect of the revolution against Louis Philippe. This worried not only the rich and middle classes, who were economically secure, but even the country's peasants were worried. They had been able to buy land and were now propertied citizens, and they feared that radical socialism might take their economic gains away from them. These liberal capitalists were squared directly against the radical socialists, who were the urban poor and working classes. However, after the 1848 elections, the Parisians lost all their representatives to the Constituent Assembly, and the national workshops were dissolved, sparking violence in the capital city. Barricades were erected, and after 3 days of vicious fighting, known as the June Days, and more than 10,000 casualties, a Republican army stood supreme, having defeated the radical socialists.
When the Second Republic decided to close the national workshops in France, the workers of France rose up in protest. From June 23rd to June 26th was complete madness. All you could see were masses and masses of people clashing with each other. More and more people joined every day, engaged in pummeling each other to death with such ruthlessness it was a wonder how anyone survived. It was a period of time when France was drowning itself in its own turmoil. You really didn't know what was going to happen next.
This mayhem allowed Louis Napoleon, otherwise known as Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, to take power and bring order to the country through an authoritarian regime, officially ending the French Revolution of 1848. Effectively, the rich had traded their liberty that they had gained for the security that this authoritarian regime would bring with it. Nationalist groups in the Austrian Empire saw the success of the French Revolt, the initial phases against Louis Philippe, and demanded democracy from their own oppressive overlords. Hungarians, Italians, and Czechs each fought separately for their respective national autonomy. These people wanted social reforms, written constitutions, and the ability to vote for delegates in their governments. These groups of reformers initially were able to secure promises from their kings, but these promises would be annulled when the monarchs were able to wrest back control from them. The first group to revolt were the Hungarians, who wanted suffrage, autonomy, and civil liberties. Ferdinand I of Austria initially agreed, but never fulfilled his word. The first and only true reform brought about by these revolutions in Austria was the abolition of serfdom in Austria. This, ironically, led to the weakening of the whole revolutionary movement. Just like after the Great Fear in the French Revolution, once the rural poor were economically freed and given what they had wanted, they lost interest in loftier political goals. When the urban poor then wanted nationalist workshops like those in France, the middle classes who were well off under the capitalist system were appalled by these demands.
Another reason why the movement faltered involved brilliant Austrian diplomacy to control the fringe groups and concentrate them against the rebels, akin to how Muammar Gaddafi kept control of Libya for many years. The Hungarians wanted the final goal of the revolt to be a united Hungarian kingdom. Austria increased the worries of the minorities in that region, the Serbs and the Romanians, in order to get them back to the counter-revolution. The reason why the Austrian revolt failed was because each nationalist group fought alone. Had all of the nationalist groups banded together, their attempts might have succeeded. Their individual efforts, however, were easily crushed by the power of the Austrian army, with Austria only needing Russia's help to put down the Hungarian revolt. Furthermore, had the fringe groups in Hungary realized that they might have had it better under a Hungarian kingdom, there would have been a far higher likelihood that the Hungarians would have succeeded.
Archduchess Sophia convinced Ferdinand I to abdicate his throne to her son, Francis Joseph, so that he could rally the troops against the Hungarians. In a surprising turn of events, Sophia was able to create nationalism for the Austrians in order to swing the momentum of the revolution. Ultimately, the aristocracy and the army were able to crush the Viennese revolt in October of 1848, and, with the help of Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, end the Hungarian revolt in mid-1849. Prussia was the site of the Third Great Revolution of 1848. When Prussian liberals saw the revolts in France and Austria, they too wanted liberal reforms to create a constitutional monarchy. Artisans and middle-class families in Berlin joined together, and Friedrich William IV consented to liberal reforms like a liberal constitution and the creation of a national German state. Again, the workers wanted socialist reforms which turned the middle class against them and made the middle class join the counter-revolution. While a new constitution was being written for Prussia in Berlin, a simultaneous assembly wrote a constitution for a new German state, as opposed to the previous format of 38 loosely united states of the German Confederation. This is another example of nationalist ideology penetrating into the affairs of the revolutions. Shortly after the conference began, the Schleswig-Holstein affair began. These two states were controlled by Denmark, but were composed of a German ethnic majority. When the Danish king Friedrich VII tried to bring them into his own nation, the people in those two states revolted. The National Assembly encouraged Prussian forces to go to war for the defense of these two German majority states, indicative of the nationalist and ethnocentric ideals and goals of the Prussian Revolution. Eventually, the new constitution was finished, granting a liberal constitution to the people and placing King Friedrich William of Prussia as the emperor of the new German nation, with the exception of the states of Austria and Schleswig-Holstein. Then, the emperor suddenly asserted his divine right to rule, dissolved the Prussian assembly, and began to rule as an authoritarian king, giving the people a conservative constitution rather than the liberal one that he had promised. The Austrians convinced Russia to support them in their efforts against Friedrich William, and the new emperor was forced to dissolve the new German nation and reverse the German unification, and all of the changes that had come with it.